They called him the shadow of God on earth. But behind the silk curtains of his palace, the air reeked of death. On the night of his coronation, 19 boys, his own brothers, were led away one by one, strangled with silk cords so that no royal blood would spill. And as dawn rose over Istanbul, the empire had a new ruler, and 19 tiny graves. They say the Ottoman throne was built not on gold, but on blood. In the heart of the empire, where loyalty meant survival and mercy meant death, power was the only prayer the sultans knew. This story begins in 1595, when the old Sultan Mehmed III died, leaving behind a son, Mehmed III, a prince who had spent most of his life locked away in the caves, the royal cage. It was tradition, a cruel one. The sons of the Sultan were kept prisoners within the palace, forbidden from seeing the outside world. They were taught poetry, the Quran, and the art of war, but never given the freedom to live. Because in the Ottoman world, every prince was a potential rival. So when Mehmed's father died, the door of the cage opened not to freedom, but to blood. To sit on the throne, he had to ensure no one could challenge his rule. And that meant one thing: fratricide, the killing of brothers. This wasn't madness. It was law. A decree written generations before by Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror himself. Whichever of my sons inherits the throne, it is fitting that he should kill his brothers, for the peace of the world. And so, on that cold night, Mehmed gave the order. 19 young princes, some barely able to walk, were taken from their chambers. Silk cords, chosen to avoid spilling blood, were looped around their necks. The palace echoed with silent cries, muffled under the weight of tradition. The next morning, Istanbul woke to the booming of cannons, the signal of a new sultan. The people rejoiced, unaware of what had just taken place behind those marble walls. But inside the harem, the mothers of the dead sons wailed. The empire was safe, but a family was destroyed. The throne was his. The empire bowed. And yet, Sultan Mehmed III could not escape the silence that followed. In the grand halls of Topkapi Palace, where musicians once played and laughter once echoed, he often sat alone, staring at his reflection in a pool of water. Every time he looked, he swore he saw 19 faces staring back. The empire had seen cruelty before, but never at such a scale. 19 princes, all of royal blood, buried before the Sultan's first sunrise as ruler. The people whispered that the spirits of the murdered brothers still roamed the palace gardens. Even the servants avoided the corridors at night. But the empire could not stop. The enemies of the Ottomans were watching, waiting for weakness. And so, the new sultan buried his guilt beneath the weight of his crown. He turned to war, the only way to prove his worth. In 1596, he led his army against the Habsburgs in Hungary, one of the most brutal campaigns of his reign. Hundreds of thousands marched under his banner, the crescent flag fluttering against the cold winds of Europe. The Battle of Mezőkeresztes became his test, a war for redemption. The fighting lasted days. Cannons roared, muskets thundered, and the rivers ran red. The Ottomans nearly lost, until fate turned. The enemy, thinking victory was theirs, began looting the Sultan's camp. But Mehmed's soldiers struck back with fury, turning defeat into triumph. When word of victory reached Istanbul, the people cheered. Songs were written in the Sultan's honor. But within the palace, celebration could not drown the echoes of the past. Because even in victory, Mehmed was restless. His health began to fade, and his mind grew darker. Witnesses wrote that the Sultan spent long nights wandering the palace alone, whispering prayers, asking forgiveness from God and from the brothers he had slain. One chronicler described it simply: he ruled an empire of millions, but could not rule the silence within his heart. Meanwhile, the empire itself began to feel the curse. The court turned corrupt, officials grew greedy, and executions became common. Fear ruled more than faith. Behind the golden walls of Istanbul, the same cycle repeated. Sons growing up in cages, learning that to survive, they might one day have to kill their own blood. What began as a law for peace had become a chain of death that strangled generations. And Sultan Mehmed III, the man who had obeyed that cruel decree, was now its prisoner. His throne was secure, but his soul was lost. Years passed, but peace never returned to Mehmed's heart. He had ruled an empire larger than life, yet inside, he felt smaller with every passing day. No amount of gold, victory, or prayer could silence the ghosts that followed him. They said that every night, the Sultan would wake to the sound of children crying, though none were there. Sometimes he ordered guards to search the palace for intruders. But the only intruder was his own memory. The throne that was supposed to bring him power had become a prison of guilt. He avoided the royal gardens, where the graves of his brothers lay hidden among the cypress trees. He stopped attending court for days at a time. The empire was now ruled not by his will, but by his fear. In 1603, after just 8 years on the throne, Mehmed III fell ill. The doctors tried everything: herbs, elixirs, even sacred prayers, but his body refused to heal. Witnesses said his final days were filled with silence. He no longer spoke of war, politics, or power. He only whispered verses from the Quran, asking for mercy. When the Sultan finally died, the palace did not erupt in mourning. There was only quiet relief, as if the empire itself could finally breathe again. But his death brought no peace to the world he left behind. Because the system he had obeyed, the law of fratricide, continued. For generations, princes were locked in the caves, growing up like birds who could never fly, knowing that one day, only one of them would live to see the sky. Some historians called it the most terrifying law in royal history. A rule that killed love before it could even exist. And though later sultans eventually abandoned the practice, the damage was already done. The empire had lost its heart long before it lost its land. The fear that one brother could kill another haunted every royal bloodline that followed. Today, when people visit the Topkapi Palace, they see the glittering halls, the marble courtyards, and the golden domes shining in the sunlight. But what they don't see are the shadows, the cries that once echoed through those walls, the silent footsteps of 19 princes who never had a chance to live. It's easy to forget how much power demands. But history remembers. Because behind every crown, there's always a cost. And for Sultan Mehmed III, that cost was 19 innocent souls and the peace of his own. Final reflection. History often glorifies kings, crowns, and conquests. But sometimes, the greatest tragedies lie behind the victories we celebrate. The story of the Sultan who killed his brothers is not just about power, it's about what happens when power becomes more sacred than life itself.